Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com. I'm here today with a project update video for this 1/6 scale radio-controlled Armortek German King Tiger heavy tank. Since the last video update, a lot of progress has been made to the turret's roof as well as the rear section, and at this point here the turret is basically completed. We'll be going over all of these additions and modifications that went into the build to get it up to this point here in this video, so stay tuned because there's going to be a bunch of content flying right at you. Diving directly into this video takes us to this component set that we have here. What you're looking at is the new EastCoastArmory.com 1/6 scale King Tiger turret detail set. This consists of the following components. We have here the vane sight, which consists of the vane sight mount and the sight itself, the Periscope guard, as well as also the optic detailing, which as you can see is made out of a translucent HD 3D printed material. In addition to the Periscope guard, we also have these two brackets that are found here. As for what their purposes are, honestly, I don't know. The only thing I know is they are on the real examples that I was researching, so ergo, they're going to be here on the set. After I filmed this scene here, a viewer of the channel filled me in on the purpose of these brackets in question, which, by the way, I want to take the opportunity to say thank you, and that information is greatly appreciated. The purpose of the brackets, as I was told, was that they are for poison gas indicators, which would be mounted to these two areas. The other location would be mounted on the front, and it's that little bracket that I mentioned in a previous video that's fitted over the mantlet. Another bit of detailing that's going to be supplied on the production units that are absent on this one over here are the three turret bosses. I touched upon these in the last video, but on the top roof of the King Tiger, there are these three bosses that are welded to the top sections that are used to erect a crane in order to get access to the engine. These components are not found on this set over here, however you can see the renderings popping up in the lower portion here of the screen. Just like with the remainder of the components, the bosses have their weld beads integrally printed on, so it's one less thing that needs to be sculpted by the builder. Here you can get a better look at what the components look like. On the brackets over here, there are these fasteners that are mounted in place, and the interior portion of the fasteners are rendered as well. The Armortek kit supplies you only with the Periscope cover, and the piece itself is just a simplistic form. It's just a CNC'd block of aluminum that has the overall shape and geometry as the component over here, but the piece is a solid turning, so you do not have the open feature like you see on this one, and also there is no Periscope detailing. The kit one is salvageable. I did use it on my own personal build, only when I was going through the motion on that build, I hollowed out a section on the inside and I fabricated a faux Periscope lens to add the missing detailing. But with this set over here, that's no longer the case. Hopping back to the roof of the model, the roof is going through the next phase of its assembly where I'm going to go ahead and start adding on the remainder of the details. The first thing I want to touch upon are the lift hooks that are found on the front and the rear. Like I touched upon in the last video, the kit does have these areas pre-drilled out, and they do have these pre-bent aluminum metal pieces to act as your hooks. The hooks are nicely shaped, however, in my opinion, they seem to be a bit on the smaller side, ever so slightly. So rather than using the kit ones, I decided to go ahead and make brand new ones. Here you can see the bodywork that was done. The front hole here I'm keeping because this one here is perfectly fine and the location is ideal. The second one was just plugged up with a little bit of epoxy and sanded flush with the red glazing putty, and then I drilled a brand new one directly on top of it. As you can see, the hole was super close to where it needed to be, but in my opinion the hooks are just a tad bit too small. So I'm going to go ahead and on this build craft new ones out of metal rod, bend them to shape, and then fit them in place. Don't be surprised if you're going to see me make a 3D printed set for these components, and I'll probably have a little sample of CAD drawing right here in this corner, but for this build here, the metal ones should work perfectly fine. So here are the new lift hooks that I fabricated. These are fabricated out of 1/8 of an inch bar stock that I just simply bent and hammered into shape. This one here is a bit on the shorter end, but it should be more than suffice for the job at hand. Well, from here, let's go ahead and get them installed, and then I'll be able to sculpt the weld beads, completing the detailing. With the lift hooks mounted in place, the next thing to mount on is the optic. The optic, since the previous scene, has been painted and primed. I went ahead and painted the inside portion here dunkelgelb, and I also painted this area here with the same coloring. The reason why this is done is, well, simply put, once the pieces get mounted and fitted in place, you're not exactly going to be able to get paint into this area over here, so it's a great idea to pre-paint these areas prior to the installation of the parts. Aside from pre-painting these two areas, I also went ahead and painted the optic. And I gotta say, this piece came out better than I would have originally anticipated. I'm not sure how well this is coming through on camera, but the lens itself looks like an actual prism, and the piece looks like a dead ringer for a real optic. The piece, as we know, is printed in the HD material, which has a semi-translucent appearance to it normally. However, in order to perfect it even further, I did a little trick to the lens area over here that I'm going to be touching upon when I go over the prisms on the Cupola. But needless to say, it came out absolutely perfect. From here, I'm going to go ahead and start with the mounting procedure. When it comes for mounting these pieces, they're basically going to drop in the exact same location as the kit original part. Although the kit original piece is a bit overly simplistic with its shape as well as with its detailing, however, the mounting location is absolutely perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and index this piece over where the original one was mounted as per the kit. Now, of course, the bodywork was done on this area over here to plug up those holes, but hopefully this comes out on camera, but there's a slight discoloration on the two areas where the original fasteners were supposed to go. These are going to be a perfect location to index the new component to drop directly in place. The other thing I need to do is drill out the center portion so that the optic can plug into this area. The next big accessory that I'm going to be working on for probably the duration of this video is going to be the Tank's Commander's Cupola. Here you get to see basically all the components that are kit supplied in order to assemble this part. Obviously, all the components are still wrapped in their original packaging, so I'm going to go ahead and unbox everything and go over what each of these components are. Might as well start with the biggest one first. This here is the main cupola ring itself. It's made from a single turning of CNC aluminum, and it's actually a really nice component. It has the appropriate shape, the geometry is all there, the cutouts are all there, and this is a fantastic starting point in order to progress from this point onward. This piece, as well as the majority of the piece on the table, have been identical on all of the renditions of the Armortek King Tiger that have been produced since 2009 or so, when the kit was originally first brought to market. So the next one is this little ring over here. This here is the main machine gun ring, or the anti-aircraft machine gun ring, I should say. This piece is made from a single length of laser cut steel that's then bent to the appropriate shape that we have here. Moving on takes us to the actual hatch itself. The hatch is made from a single turning of CNC aluminum, and it does have that nice outward dome appearance to it. However, the inside is flat and there are absolutely no details found on the inner contents, which is quite typically found on these Armortek kits. While on the topic of the turnings, takes us to this large lump of aluminum right over here. This piece will be mounted in this portion here of the cupola, and this is the guide that the hatch pin rides along in order to open, rotate, and close. Next takes us to a few other little bits, namely these laser cut and pre-bent sections. These components here are the Periscope brush guards, and these are the ones that go over the areas of the cupola that the ring will sit upon. That's why they have this little notch that's integrally laser cut into the metal. The other type of Periscope guards that are present are these units here, which obviously do not have that little notch in because these are going to be the ones that are more towards the ends over here of the cupola where the ring does not exist, or I should say doesn't extend. The pieces are the exact same type of tooling as found on the other pieces, only sans the little cutout square. And to wrap it all off, we have here a pre-bent aluminum rod handle and a long bolt. The bolt is going to be used for the actual hinge mechanism to open and close the hatch, and the handle is, well, you guessed it, going to be the detailing for the little handle found on the Commander's Cupola. The only thing that's not present on the table at this time are the little Periscope inserts, which are kit supplied, and these have changed somewhat over the general releases. I've seen these in cast resin, aluminum, and I believe the newer ones may or may not be 3D print. So depending on the generation of kits you have will affect the material that the pieces are made in. The periscopes themselves are just basically very generic in their overall shape and detailing, which is suffice for, just getting you off the ground. This is something that I may or may not utilize on this build, and I might be swapping them out for some other type of alternative, but we'll see as the build progresses. So, as we just saw, the Armortek kit gives you enough components with their cupola to give you something that gives you the look and feel of the King Tiger cupola. However, it does leave some room for improvement. In order to get a little bit more accuracy out of the stock parts, I went ahead and tooled up the components that we have right here. What you're looking at is the new EastCoastArmory.com Armortek King Tiger or late production Tiger 1 Cupola detail accessory set. Bit of a mouthful, but basically what you get are several detail fittings that are used to enhance the stock Armortek King Tiger or late Tiger 1 Commander's Cupola. This set is intended to recycle several of the detail fittings that are found on the Armortek kit supplied parts, while other components that are supplied on this set here are used to direct replace several of the components that are supplied with the kit. These pieces here are all 3D printed with the exception of the following headrests because these are actually made from cast rubber. And I'll go into that more in a moment or two. As for the 3D printed components, most of them are found on this sprue that we have here, and this consists of both the exterior and interior detail fittings, and we have several HD 3D printed Periscope inserts. On the main sprue itself, we'll start with the hatch. The hatch, although one is supplied with the Armortek kit, gives you the basic look and feel for the exterior. However, one shortcoming that the Armortek kit hatches have is that they are just machined flat on the inside. On the real vehicle, this would be a concave type setup, and in addition to that, there's also a little bit of interior detailing, which is facilitated with this guy that we have right here. This here is the headrest that will be fitted towards the inside portion of the hatch. Once I clip everything off, you'll see it in better focus. And this gives you some really good accurate detailing, specifically since the headrest on the real piece would be a cloth type material, and this being made out of cast rubber does a good job with mimicking that type of a material. Of course, the headrest has all of its fasteners found on the component, and this, by the way, is made from a 3D printed master and just made to just drop right in once, of course, the unit goes into production. The next thing that we have is an all-encompassing integral machine gun ring with the periscope guards. On the stock kit, as we touched on before, all these pieces are separate components and have to be assembled by the builder. This, of course, is doable. However, one weakness that the Armortek kit does have is with the way the ring secures to the periscope guards. On the Armortek piece, most people tend to glue it in place, and they use JB Weld. I've seen a few instances for reasons that escape me, because honestly JB Weld's overrated junk, but the problem is it just doesn't hold up and it'll crack off very easily. On my builds, the way I remedy this is I actually solder it directly to the steel periscope guards, and this does a way better job in keeping it in place. However, rather than just going through all of that, I decided to just make the unit as one integral printing. With this, you get the optimum amount of strength, but you also get some details that you just don't really get if you're going about it with the other method. On the periscope guards themselves, they have the appropriate geometry to them, and you'll notice that on the back portions, they have the angle that was added. Again, this is present on the real unit, and there's a cover plate that is found on this section, and that cover plate is welded, and not only is the plate present, but so are the weld beads. The weld beads are also present on the top portion here where the rail makes contact with the periscope guards, and they have this type of stagger format, which is something that I was inspired off of a real King Tiger that I was using for reference. On the front periscope guard, right over here, you'll see the little hatch stop, which is a guide and helps the hatch align back into place when dropping it into the closed position. And on the front section, you'll see it has a little, I guess this would be considered part of the vane sight, as it lines up with the other sight that's found on the roof that I touched upon earlier. But again, it's all integrally printed as one unit, and it's one less thing that you have to fabricate yourself. Removing the top portion is really simple. It's just held on with little columns, and these are just snipped away with a pair of clean cut snips. Oop. And once the units are removed, now you get to see the interior portion of the hatch in better light. Note the concave appearance to it right here. And if I take that headrest and put it in place, you'll see exactly how much better the detailing is compared to the stock basic offering. The set is designed to retain the most important piece of the cupola, which is the main ring itself. And as you can see, the ECA pieces drops directly into place without any fitting issues whatsoever. The next thing to talk about is what's on the inside, or I should say what's under that hatch. You see a bunch of little brackets on here, and if I flip it over, you'll see several more of them. These are the internal components for the Periscope mounts. These on the real unit would be able to hinge downward, and this is how you remove the Periscope prisms if one or two of them get damaged. Obviously in combat, that's something that can happen readily easily. So these pieces here will basically just hinge down and then clip back in place, securing the Periscope where it needs to be. On the set here, you have the detailing, which will give you the details which are absent on the stock section, which as you can see does have the appropriate shape to it. It's just a bit vacant on the inside. So with this set here, you get to flesh out the remainder of those details. Along with the Periscope mounts, you have the headrest guard that's right over here. Again, just like with the other components, it is pre-detailed with all of its fasteners and even the weld beads. And you will see little holes that are found around this ring. Well, those are for the cast rubber headrests to just get slipped into place when everything is fully painted and is, coming towards the end of its construction. Along with the headrest, we have this device that we have here, and this device is the crank wheel that's used to open and pivot the hatch out of the way. Note the cam mechanism that's present on the surface. And we also have the main pin. The pin itself is used to replace the fastener that's designed to be used on the kit to, facilitate the same function. This one here has the better detailing found on the top portion, which looks like a giant slot screw. The piece is also hollow on the inside because there is a pin found on the inside portion over here where I believe there would be a spring on the real unit. And again, all of these details are found on the ECA piece. On the reverse side, you'll see some other details, namely this little component that we have here, which looks like a long slot screw. This is used to secure the hatch that I showed before to the hatch arm. You see the stock hatch arm is going to be recycled on this model, and you can see exactly where those two slot screw looking like appendages get mounted in place. One other bit of equipment that gets recycled is the actual hinge itself. This piece will get secured to the cupola as per the kit, and then the remaining detail that I touched upon before will get secured to the inside. And that's really it for the main runner. The remainder of the components are the periscopes. Here you can see what the periscope prisms look like. Like with several of the other similar components, they are printed in HD material, which means they are translucent, and like we saw before, once they are fully painted, should have a really good realistic look to them. So during assembly, I have the hinge mount glued to the cupola base, which is exactly how the kit is intended. While those set, I've been working on getting the 3D printed parts snipped away and getting ready for installation. Starting with the machine gun ring, this was actually something that I personally was a little iffy on when I was designing the part, because if the part was off dimensionally one way or another, it wouldn't fit on the milled slots over here. But looks like I was able to keep my decimals in the right place, and the piece just drops directly in. One tweak, though, that I do have to make to the cupola is that it does fit, but the rails are slightly shorter than they would need to be in order for the piece to just sit flush onto the cupola. As you can see, they stick out just a little bit by, what is that, like 1/8 of an inch or so. Now, the modification is one that is done with a Dremel with a router bit, and by the way, the same procedure would still have to be done if I was building this with the stock out-of-the-box components, as again, it would fit onto the piece in basically the exact same way. So right now it's standard Armortek cupola construction at this point. In order to lengthen these cutouts, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of the Periscope guards. This is obviously one of the loose ones that are not connected to the ring. I'm going to place it where it needs to be, and then with a pencil, I'm just going to mark the location right there in the front where the material needs to be cut away. You don't want to remove the material towards the back because the back lines up pretty good, and that's not something that you need to mess with. Also, like I stated before, I'm using the 3D printed one, but you would have to do the same procedure with the stock supplied metal ones that are, again, given to you with the kit. So the same procedure can work with those too if you so choose to use the kit ones as opposed to the 3D printed upgrade set. Once all of the cutouts are marked, it's then time to enlarge the little sections, and this is done with the Dremel. And I'm going to be utilizing a router bit that we have right here. These are purchased from my vendor that I have listed below. And this here, I believe, is that's a 2.4 millimeter router bit. Hopefully that comes in focus. And the individual, you can buy these in a pack where he just has nothing but these, or you get an assorted pack if you deem fit. But with the amount of usage I use with these ones, I generally just buy all of them in the same size. Once thoroughly marked, the piece is mounted in the Dremel, and then it's time to make some chips. Once the units are lengthened, the piece just drops right into place, and as you can see, the height is much better. Now, even though the pieces are pre-welded, you still have to sculpt weld beads on the side portions and possibly the rear section over here in order to complete the look. But this is a fraction of the work required if you're going to do the same procedure with the metal ones, because to do this in metal, you have to take the kit ones, angle cut each of these pieces and do it to every single one of them and do it in an even manner, and then you're going to have to cut the little plates out of metal each time and then solder each of them on in the perfect location. Again, it's doable. I've done it, but you know, it's a bit simpler going with this route. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and continue the rest of the lengthening process and then continue with the remainder of the build. So after I went ahead and enlarged the cutouts for the periscopes, I went ahead and added a coat of cast texturing to the surface here of the cupola. Of course, the real King Tiger turret would have been a cast piece, and by adding the texturing, this flares in the seams where the unit over here connects to the cupola, but also gives you that extra added bit of realism. Of course, for the technique, this is the same technique that I've touched upon on many of my builds, and I have a video where I go over this in more depth. In fact, I'm actually editing another video where I spend most of the video doing this technique. So, but you know, the video where I already talk about that is in the video description below. So the cast texturing was added and now blends all of this in. And from here, this could actually progress further to where we can start fitting on some of the details. On the interior portion, you'll notice I went ahead and removed a little bit of material found on either side here of this ring. And that was because I need the clearance to mount on the new hinge mechanism, or I should say the cam mechanism is the best way to put it. This just gets mounted to this component with adhesives. Now, in order to secure this in place, you are going to have to make a modification to the kit supplied pivot mechanism. The way the piece is just a solid CNC turning with the hole drilled in, that's about 1/4 of an inch for the rod to go up and down. Well, with the way this unit fits in place, you actually have this section that extends out from it, and all you gotta do is you have to drill a corresponding hole inside of the lug. Partway through, about halfway through, is really the depth that you need in order for this to just slide directly into place. From here, this can get fastened to the piece with the use of adhesives. If you want, you could also delete and amputate the printed on fasteners and use real fasteners if you so deem fit, but for this one here, the adhesive should work just fine. Once that is ready, the pin can just go straight into place and it'll be able to operate as it would on the real tank. One other thing I want to mention about the pin here is that because there is a hole drilled into the center, or I should say integrally printed into the center, with the way the manufacturing process is, this hole is actually filled up with the nylon powder that the piece is manufactured from. And in order to get it out, basically you take a piece of wire or a 16 of an inch drill pin and you basically just poke it in and out a few times. Then a few taps and the powder just comes tumbling right out. Once the powder comes tumbling out, the piece will be able to slide into the recessed pin that's right there in the middle of this lug without any problems whatsoever. You are going to have to drill a small hole in this and insert a piece of supplied wire, which will give you the lever that's used to cam everything in place, but that's something that's going to be touched upon as the build goes on. For the hinge itself, or I should say the mounting lever itself, the way this works is that you are going to have to drill out the threads that are found on this section over here to the sides that we have here, which is about 1/4 of an inch or so. So you just drill that out on a drill press and this unit just slides directly in place. Once it's in, it's going to fit flush, you know, to a certain point, but it's exactly as what you would see on the real vehicle. For the one on the front, you can mount the locking fastener out of the box. However, to make it fit a little bit better, you do need to square this section off. With the way the piece is milled, it has a 60-degree cut into it because it's meant for a countersunk fastener. So in order to make this squared off section fit in better, you take a end mill and you basically just carefully drill it out to the point where it becomes flat. The problem is this procedure is quite risky because you could over drill and destroy this piece, and if you over drill, the piece is basically ruined. So much so that if you're going with this setup, just use it stock if you don't have the skill level or the tooling to pursue it any further, and it should work, you know, basically just fine. But from here, I went ahead and took care of that so you get to see what it looks like, hopefully if the camera gets in focus, what the component looks like all flattened off, and then this piece here just goes directly into its appropriate location. So at this point now, I'm actually going to install the cam mechanism, and then once that's mounted, the entire interior and exterior is going to get primed, and the inside portion here are going to get primed as well, because obviously once these get glued to the surface, you're not going to really be able to get in there with the paint. So this is going to be taken care of at this point. But just before this guy goes into paint, I went ahead and completed the hinge work that we have here. The hole was drilled out like I touched upon before, and then the piece was adhered to this location with the use of adhesives. The next thing that I did to keep it in place was a trick that I've used on several of the other builds where I just, you know, modify the kit components, and that is where I take a 16 of an inch drill bit and I drill a hole directly through the side portion, through the stem, and then through the opposite side. Then I take a 16 of an inch metal pin and just press it into the appropriate location. Once that's in place, the piece is not going to move anywhere. It's locked in fully, and then the job is completed. The next thing, though, that I need to do is with the little release lever that I touched upon before. So here's what it looks like on the inside. Note, I went ahead and already marked it with a pencil. I'm going to drill this out, and I'm going to insert in a metal wire. The metal wire is going to run along this little track over here, and on the real tank, this is actually how you physically pull or rotate the hatch in addition to the crank wheel. This would go up to this location, to which then it would stop, and then you would be able to rotate it, and then you'll notice that it could drop directly into place here when the hatch is in the open position. To close it, you have to first lift up, rotate, and then it goes back home. So with the piece drilled out, I could go ahead and get this section drilled while the remainder of the unit could head off into paint. While the cupola parts are going through their paint, I'm now focusing on the commander's hatch itself. The hatch, because it is 3D printed, does have some small scan lines that are found on the surface, which is, you know, common on all 3D prints that are out there. The scans are not that noticeable at all and are kind of mild. However, to enhance the part further, I went ahead and coated the entire surface here with super glue, and then I just wet sanded everything down to a nice, smooth appearance. The same technique is also going to be done on the bottom, and also you get to see the contrast between the top as well as also the inside. The lines that are present right now are very similar to what was experienced on the outside portions of the hatch. To smooth these out, I'm using a technique that I showed on another one of my 1/6 scale videos, namely is one of the V100 armor car videos, where I ran into a similar situation like this here, and I dealt with it in basically the same exact manner. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take super glue, and I'm going to add a liberal amount here on the surface, basically a star or a sand dollar type formation. And then once it's applied with my finger, I'm going to go ahead and just smear it evenly on the surface. A lot of people out there, they see that and they wonder themselves, why don't I just use a cheap paintbrush to do the same technique? The simple matter is that I don't want to waste a paintbrush, even a little cheap dollar store one, and also I have better control with my finger applying it as opposed to paintbrush. One thing I noticed from whenever people use cheap paintbrushes or any paintbrush to apply a material like this, they tend to lose bristles. Now you have bristles embedded into the surface that you have to sand away now, and just, you know, leads to extra work. With your finger, that's not really the case unless you leave your thumbprint on something long enough and you get a fingerprint transferred over. But other than that, once the glue is applied, I then carefully set the hatch aside and I let it dry. As for my finger, I just wipe it down on a cloth or my crappy jeans that I'm wearing right now, and that's basically it. I use slow cure CA, so removing it off my finger is pretty effortlessly done. And also, you just let the piece just, you know, run its course. Once the glue is fully set, I can then have at it with the sandpaper, leaving for the smooth appearance that we saw on the exterior portion. The reason why I have to go through this procedure is that the material that's used for the 3D printed parts is actually really robust and resilient on abrasive. So if you hit it with just sandpaper alone, it's not going to sand away as it would on something like wood or plastic or even resin for that matter. So the addition of the glue is the best way to smooth out those thin little lines that are found on surfaces that are 3D printed. As for the material, another common question I get is, John, what type of printer do you have, or, you know, what technique are you using? And I don't know. All of my prints that you see are outsourced, and as for the type of equipment, I have no clue. I believe this might be called FDM, if I'm not mistaken. It's the one where you have like a tub full of nylon powder, and then a laser goes over the sections, and wherever the laser hit, it adheres and it sticks to itself, and then the layers are built upon which. So that's the manufacturing technique. As for what it's called or the machines used, I couldn't tell you. Jumping to the Periscope inserts, here you get to see all the Periscopes that I showed before, but now they're going through their painting process. In order to paint them, you'll see that I went with the following configuration, where the top portion is painted with red-brown, while the bottom portion is painted in flat black. Both of these colors are, to me, acrylics, and they were just simply brushed on with a paintbrush. One trick that I did to the lenses was the same thing that I touched upon earlier with the visor, is that the lenses found on these HD 3D printed components are translucent with their overall material. However, because of the printing process, for some reason, on some occasions, it's not fully clear. Like, there may be a little bit of cloud going on them. And for the Periscopes, in order to clean them up a bit, I found that if you brush on Tamiya clear lacquer, which is a gloss coat, by the way, X22 specifically, you will be able to get the sheen of the prism to return, and it'll actually have some pretty good results. Here you get to see what the unit looks like with the second coat added. And as you can see, the prism does look very, very good. From what I've seen, it takes about 2 coats to make them in the appearance that we have here. This one here only has the first coat applied. And as you can see, the result is, it's improving compared to the way it was originally, but with the second coat added, it will definitely be a much needed improvement. To apply it, this is again done with a fine precision paintbrush, and you just go in there and you just basically manually just paint the lenses. Here I have the paintbrush here that I'm using. In fact, I'll go ahead and get this on screen. So make sure the paint is nice and stirred. Just load the brush and then just apply to the appropriate locations. Of course, you want to use a really good quality paintbrush for this, because if the paintbrush is crummy or it's too large or has too many, fringes coming off of it, you're not exactly going to be able to get into the areas with the lacquer, and it'll just cause problems. So just brush it on, and once applied, the lens will have a much better appearance to it. Make sure you get into those little corners. And there you go. As you can see, a vast improvement compared to the first coat that it was before. If necessary, you may need to give it a third coat, but honestly, from what I've seen, just 2 coats, and that's a good place to start with. After the second coat, then you get to evaluate whether or not you want to try it again for a third round. So here we have the cupola now ready for final assembly. At this point here, all the components have been painted, weathered, all of the sub-assemblies have been assembled, and also the final sculpting has been completed. Let's go ahead and go over all of this before this thing heads off into final assembly. Starting from right to left, here we have the headrest mount, and at this point here you can see what it looks like with the headrest now fitted in place. Like I said before, the headrests are made from cast rubber, and because of that, they give a really good realistic look to them, as opposed to trying to paint and replicate rubber by painting some other type of material. Of course, that can be done. It has been done several times in the past, but there's just something to be said about using real rubber when you get the chance to. It's kind of like wood. Anyway, so the piece has been fully weathered. This includes both for the ring as well as with the rubber itself. And this is going to be installed to the ring once the periscopes are fitted. This is the last unit that gets mounted in place, just to avoid any sort of contact with the periscope mounts I'll touch upon in a second. Here we have the completed periscopes. I already talked about this in depth before with the addition of the lacquer. And again, the pieces at this point here are ready for assembly, or I should say installation. For the periscope mounts, these two have been fully painted and weathered with the use of both washes and dry brushing, and it gives that nice realistic worn look that is typically seen on well-used military vehicles. One other thing I noticed is that I kind of miscounted when I was designing the set, where I actually gave one extra periscope and periscope mount to the sets. There's 7, I believe I include 8. I'm going to leave it with this extra unit in place. It doesn't really change the price if I omit it or anything, but hey, it's also good to have spares if some kind of mishap were to arise. So that's going to stay the same. The hatch over here has also been fully assembled at this point, and the inside has been completed. Here you get to see what it looks like with the inner headrest now fitted. Again, just like with the other headrest, this piece has been weathered, and again, it gives a nice realistic look to it. On the exterior over here, the arm is the kit original, like I touched upon before, but now you get to see what it looks like with all of the 3D printed parts fitted to it. One change that I am going to be making to the set was something that I missed originally, but if you notice on this piece over here, there's a small little peg found in the center of that slot screw. This is something that I actually added for this particular unit. I must have forgot to add it on the CAD file, or if I did, it probably didn't transfer over. But by the time this video gets posted, this is going to be addressed and will be present on the production castings. For this one here, I just drilled a hole in the center and inserted a small piece of wire. On the stem, this too has also been tweaked on this one, and the changes have been made to the production units. You notice I had to add a small little extender over here. The piece without the extender was able to fully clear and open. However, in my opinion, it was just not opening far enough. It was opening enough to swing out of the way, but I felt it could have used a little bit extra length. So I calculated how much length that was, made the change, and you can see it on this one here what it looks like with that extra bit fitted. Like I touched upon before, this is going to be present on the production unit, so fear not about that. The next and final thing to talk about is also the thing that received the most amount of work in order to prep it for final assembly, and that is the cupola ring itself. As we saw earlier, these 3D printed sections just get dropped directly into place and are glued to their appropriate locations. However, also like I mentioned before, the one thing that the builder is going to have to do is sculpt the weld beads where the units make contact with the ring. This is something that I can't exactly integrally print on and has to be hand sculpted by the builder. But again, it saves a bunch of time as opposed to doing everything that I mentioned before the old-fashioned way. So the weld beads are sculpted on with a 2-part sculptable epoxy, as I often mention in these build videos. For anyone out there who wants to do some type of detailing like this, I recommend either Aves or Milliput, either which will give you the exact same result that you see here. The welds are in the following format, where they start here at the front, they move along the side, along the back portion, and then they circle around back again. This is done repeated on every one of these Periscope boxes, and once added, they really do complete the look of the set. Along with the addition of the welds over here, you'll notice that this piece here is also welded on. After looking at some examples of the King Tiger, this piece was separate from the ring itself. It's still casted, so the cast texturing is still going to be welcomed, but it is a separate piece, and the only thing I did was with some more weld beads, I just sculpted the missing welds. On this portion over here, there's this little tube that's basically just built up weld beaded in place. The tube is just a piece of Plastruct tubing. This is not supplied with the set, but again, any tube floating around your shop that's similar in diameter here will work just fine. On this side here, we have a hatch stop, which is just, again, a small piece of Plastruct strip, glued in place, then sculpted weld beads were added to complete the look. One other thing to mention about the weld beads is that this needs to be done prior to the periscopes being fitted, because on the inside portion over here, I like to take a paintbrush and paint the little area of epoxy that's present from when you sculpt the weld beads. By doing this, this really seals up the model, and it's just one less thing that can, you know, throw off the look of it. It's a little bit nitpicky, agreed, but, you know, it's just one of those things that make me sleep better at night. On the front little rods here, of course, I add the little welds on those 2 little locations, completing the look for those. And that's basically it. The inside here is still pretty much barren, but that's going to change, because at this point, now I can go ahead and throw on all of the periscopes. So here goes the cupola heading off into final assembly. The first thing I did was I mounted on the periscopes. The periscope inserts just drop directly into place, small little drop of glue later, and they're good to go. At this time, I also want to point out that these sets are going to be offered in 2 different flavors. The first is going to be the complete 3D printed and cast rubber set, which gives you all the parts that I've been touching upon in the last few scenes. The next option is a more affordable option, and it's just the HD 3D printed periscopes themselves. This is more or less intended if you have a Armortek King Tiger or a later mid-production Tiger 1, and you're just looking to have the external details, and you really don't need or care for going through the motion to add the interior stuff. Well, that option is probably best for you. With that, you just basically yank out the kit supplied ones, or if you don't have them at all, and just drop these ones into place, giving you the external detailing that you see here. With the pieces fitted, you can really see how the cupola is fully fleshed out. So, enough with that. Back to the interior parts. Now it's time to secure on the locks themselves. So here's the cupola now with the next layer complete, which are the periscope securing mounts. The way these work on these late production cupolas is that the periscope has this little flange mechanism that secures it to the top portion of the cupola. And in order to prevent it from falling out, we have this little mechanism that we have here. Over here we have a quick release snap, and basically you would pull on this, it would pull it out of a lug in this section over here, and then the entire unit can hinge downward. The purpose of this is so that you can swap out the periscope prisms if/when they get damaged during combat. On the piece here, they just get glued directly to the side and are non-functional, but as you can see, they really do a good job giving you the look and the appropriate detailing which would be found on these components. So the next and last bit of detailing that needs to be added to the interior are the headrests and the headrest mount. These get fit on in a certain orientation. You'll note that with the way the fasteners are, they are missing some on this portion over here, and this is as per design. The reason why there are no fastener locations on this portion over here, because you don't have the room because of the lifting lug for the hatch itself. The piece will just drop directly into location as you see here. Now you have 2 options to install this. You can simply just snip off all the little pegs and just glue it directly to the cupola. However, in my opinion, that is a bit of a weak installation method. And although it's simple to do, and you just glue it on and call it a day, this may come around and bite you later on, specifically as the model ages. Because of this location over here, you may want to, insert a tank commander or a figure, or possibly you might have to just, reach inside here and grab something that may fall in. Which, if you do, if the piece is just glued on in place, as soon as something hits it, it's just going to pop right off, and then it's going to be running around on the inside of the model. So rather than going with that approach, I have these little lugs that are integrally printed to these areas, and these are intended so that you can drill corresponding holes on the inside of the cupola, and then the piece can be glued in place. But now you have the extra added support of the columns that will give it much more rigidity and much more strength. I went ahead and marked all these locations here with a Sharpie, and now on the drill press, I'm just going to drill into the surfaces. You don't have to drill in too deep, about maybe a millimeter or two, if that is all that's required in order to have the depth required in order to have the piece get into place. If you drill too deep, you have to be careful because you might over drill, and this piece here does have some sufficient thickness to it, but you do want to be careful, so you want to set the depth accordingly on the drill press. Once those are drilled out, and if the piece is still too long, you can simply just snip off a little bit extra off of this material over here, because you just need just a little bit, just so that it descends into the metal for the glues to do their job. So, enough rambling. I'm going to go ahead and get these drilled out, and then let's go ahead and get this bad boy fitted in place. All right, fresh from the drill press, the holes have been drilled. I've also adjusted the heights accordingly on the stems, and at this point here, it's time to add the adhesive and drop the piece in place. Once the headrest bracket is fitted in place, the interior is completed, and you can really see how much it's fleshed out compared to the way it was earlier. If I flip around and you get to see it from the outside, you really get to see how much the cupola has progressed and has been enhanced from the stock original offering. The last thing to do now is to fit on the hatch, which simply slides directly into place, and to secure it, that's done with that small little lever that's going to be mounted in this location over here, which is going to ride along the cam when the hatch is opening and closing. And that's it. After that, this bad boy here is ready for mounting onto the vehicle. And once the hatch is fitted, the cupola is completed. At this point here, this thing is ready for mounting onto the roof, but before I do, might as well get a chance to appreciate the detailing just before this thing gets mounted in permanently. So here goes the interior detailing, as I touched upon before, and here you get to see what it looks like from the exterior section. Back to the interior, this is the lug that I was talking about before. This secures the hatch to the cupola, and it's also used to ride in this cam that I was mentioning before. If I go ahead and open up from the outside, you can see how it operates, how it moves up in that cam line, across, and then locks into this downward position. And at this point here, the hatch is opened. To close it, you lift up, rotate, and then it should just drop directly into place. That little angular section over here really does a good job in preventing the piece from overswinging. It also helps it align perfectly to its home location. One other thing to mention is that with the addition, or I should say the replacement of the stock parts with the 3D printed parts, the cupola is a fraction of the weight as it was if I would have utilized the kit components. So that is actually beneficial, because it's a little less weight that monster over there has to lug around. It already being a really heavy model, if you save a few ounces here or there, it's pretty beneficial. So while fitting on the cupola, on this one here I encountered a little quirk, and this is something that I didn't run into my other King Tiger, and perhaps maybe this is just a one-off mishap. But with the way the thing secures to the roof, you have two fasteners that bolt into the cupola, and once tightened down, the thing isn't going nowhere, which is great. The problem is, if I move the turret plate out of the way, you'll see that the holes are on the opposite locations of where they're supposed to be on the model. If I go ahead and secure it in this format with the kit supplied holes, the turret cupola is going to be mounted on incorrectly. On the King Tiger over here, the turret cupola should be mounted on in the following orientation, where we have this periscope dead ahead with the two little vane sights, and note how they line up with this one over here, and the hinge itself is canted slightly towards the front. This is the way the cupola is supposed to be appropriately fitted to the King Tiger. Again, this is something that I did not run into on my other King Tiger build, and so far from what I've seen, all the other Armortek King Tigers don't seem to have the same issue. So perhaps this one here is just an unlucky fellow and the thing was drilled in the wrong location. But regardless, I'm just going to go ahead, drill new holes, and thread them, and then this piece can be fastened to the model with the original kit supplied holes found on the roof. Once the new holes were drilled and tapped, the cupola was then dropped directly into place. Along with fasteners, I also use adhesive to really keep this thing where it needs to be. One thing about these cupolas though is that once you mount them in, with the way the geometry is on them, you are going to have some threads protruding from the two areas where the fasteners were fitted in place. So in order to blend everything in, once the pieces are fully torqued down and they're in place, with the Dremel with a cutting stone, you go ahead and you just grind off the little nub that protrudes from the side, going in small little incremental motions until finally the piece is thoroughly blended away. In order to seal it up further with a smear of red putty over here, I'm just going to add a small little swipe on both areas. Once the putty sets, it's going to blend in with the remainder of the cast texturing that I added previously. So right over here, and nice little swipe is all you need. Rub it in and then add the stepling to it, and the texturing is completed, and once everything is fully painted, it'll blend right in with the remainder of the surface. Same thing with the one on the opposite side. With the cupola squared away, the next thing to turn my attention to is unfinished business right here on the rear plate. One really cool feature found on several King Tigers that I've seen is that the plate is not just flat, but the hatch is actually sunk and recessed into it. The way I guess this was done at the factory was that they had the metal plate and then they milled away a slot right here in the center portion for the clearance of the rear escape hatch. This bit of detailing is absent on the Armortek kit, as well as I've seen it absent on several other kits that are on the market in smaller scales. I'm not quite sure if all King Tigers had it. I'm pretty sure some King Tiger aficionado out there is going to point that out. But one thing that I love to add on these King Tigers is this bit of detailing, because it really does enhance the rear area over here and just gives it that much extra detailing. The $60,000 question is, well, John, how do you add this detailing? Obviously, the best way to do it is to take this plate, put it in the mill, and actually mill away the material. And that is true. You can do that if the equipment is something that you do have on hand. However, obviously, the turret is fully assembled, so there's no way I'm going to be able to take this off. But I'm going to utilize a technique that I used on my other King Tiger, and it's basically achieving a magic trick. I'm going to show you how that's done on this build right now. The way this technique works is that rather than milling material away, I'm actually going to be adding material to the turret, but adding it in the locations where the hatch isn't. In order to do this, the first thing I need to do is mark the locations where the hatch needs to be. And this is done simply with a pencil. So I'm just going to go up and down these two locations right here and here. And with the hatch out of the way, you get to see the lines that have been drawn. At this point here, I can remove the hatch. Like I touched upon in the last video, these hinges here are just on temporary, and they are not securing the hatch on in a permanent manner, or at least not just yet. So with the hatch removed, I'm going to go ahead and take a square and continue the line all the way from the top to the bottom. This is going to be important for the next step. Now that the parameters have been set, I need to go ahead and measure out and cut out panels that are going to be identical to the areas that we have on either side of the turret. To get the appropriate shape, we need to make a template. And the way we make a template is first starting with some plain Jane printer paper. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to tape the printer paper to the locations that are found right here on the turret. And I want to use the straight edge line found on the edge over here, lined up with the pencil line that I scribed before. Once this is secured to the model via the tape, I can then go ahead and mark where the parameters are that I need to cut. When it comes for lining up the lines, by the way, you don't want to go right up against the line. You want a little bit of leeway there. So there's just a small little gap, probably about 1/2 millimeter or so. A 16th of an inch, I guess, is the other way to put it. You could use masking tape to secure it, but right now I don't have any in the shop, so I'm just going to use a little bit of postage tape. Okay. And it's not straight. Let's try that again. Okay, once the piece is appropriately put onto the plate, and again, I cannot stress that enough, you want to be as accurate as possible, because if there's any problems here, it's going to transition and snowball during the later steps. It's then time to etch the lines, and the way we do that is again with a pencil, and we just go ahead and scribe the corners. The pencil will give you the exact location of the metal plate edges. So now you can see, here goes our metal plate, but you're going to say, John, that's great, but what about the puzzle sections for the side armor? Well, just keep sketching away. There's one. And there is two, just popping directly out through the paper. And there we have it. This is one of the sides now drawn. I am going to do the same thing to the opposite side, even though theoretically you only need one and you just mirror image it. But, you know, just to cover your bases, it's best to make one for each side. Once you got the templates, it's then time to transfer them over to some other type of material. For me, I like to use plastic, so this is what, like a millimeter thick sheet styrene. This was originally a for sale sign, which is, by the way, a real easy way to get large sections of sheet styrene for a fraction of the price as you would from just, you know, plastic suppliers. And that's an old trick that goes back for many, many decades. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to line up the piece on the plastic like this, and then with the help of a Sharpie, I'm just going to go ahead and trace over the template. Once done, you can probably see where this is going. This is all going to be trimmed away, and then I could begin the process of securing it to the side, or in this case, the rear portion of the model. Once the piece is cut out of plastic, it's then time to secure to the model. Before I do that, I prep the surfaces of both the model and the plastic itself. All I do is I hit it with some really coarse sandpaper on both of the surfaces. On the plastic, you really want to focus on the corners over here, because that's generally where a peel-up can possibly happen. So if you have sufficient scoring on these areas over here, the glue will adhere 1,000 times better. Okay, so this is prepped, and the surface of the metal is also prepped as well. Once the surface is thoroughly prepped on both of the surfaces, you want to make sure they're nice and clean. You don't want to have any sort of particulate whatsoever, because this will inhibit the glues sticking to where they need to go. And then from there, all you gotta do is add the adhesive. These are just held on with the same super glue that I've used for basically everything else, not only in this video, but all the other videos that I posted on this channel. And you want to put on a, decent amount of glue. So make sure that you focus on the corners, of course. And with this thing here, having all these edges on it, you really want to cover your bases. Pretty sure a few people in the comment section are going to be scoffing at this, like, oh, it's it's going to be a weak bond. It's not going to hold up well. That thing's going to crack off. That's a dumb idea to do it. Well, so far I've done this on my other King Tiger, and that tank is over 11, maybe 12 years old at this point, and it held up perfectly fine. So unless you have evidence to prove it, it's just hot internet air. So meanwhile, I actually have the receipts. So anyway, now once the piece is saturated with adhesive, basically just line it up and I press it to the side of the model. Of course, keeping aware of the orientation of all of the reference point lines that I touched upon before. So just make sure it's exactly where it needs to be. Like I said before, you don't want to have it up on the line. You can have a little bit of a breather around it. And once you are happy with the location of the plate, just step back, make sure it's on in an even manner. There's no air bubbles or anything. Just step back and let the adhesives do their job. Once they are fully set, we can then continue with the remainder of the procedure. But before I do that, I need to get this side skinned as well. So once the plastic is fitted to both sides, it's then time to start the refinement. And this is going to include squaring off the leading edges where the plate makes contact with the top and the bottom portions, as well as also on the side over here. This side you don't have to worry about because, like I said before, when we were putting on the plate, you want to make sure it's in a nice square format originally. But the reason why it's important to polish down these three areas is because this is where there's going to be a transition, or there shouldn't be any transition specifically, on where the metal plate makes contact with the plastic part. This will give the illusion that this piece here is milled in, as opposed to these two sections being added on. So I'm just going over the sides here with a little bit of sandpaper, but you can also use a file if the material is thick enough. And after a while, the piece will be polished away. From this point here, I can go ahead and add putty to the top and bottom portion, as well as this side over here. This area here, I'm not going to add putty because of the torch cut lines. If I add the putty, it's going to be kind of hard to try to blend it all in. So what I'm going to do is on this side here, I'm going to use super glue in order to fill in that gap, and then I can polish that down and re-add the cut lines to the appropriate locations. These areas here you don't have to worry about so much because these transitions are going to be concealed by the sculpted weld beads, which once added will blend everything in. Also, the other thing that I'm doing at this point is sanding away the little film left over from the for sale sign. This is just, you know, a very thin piece of material that's printed on, and with a little bit of elbow grease and some sandpaper, it polishes away pretty quickly. Which, by the way, if you are using the for sale sign method, you do have to do that procedure because this little film here will stick out after everything is fully painted, and you don't really want to see a for sale section found on your rear plate. Kind of throws off the look of the model. So from here, let me go ahead and do the same thing to this plate, and then we can go ahead and add the putty. Well, you can see how the transformation is progressing. This side here is completely done and it's just waiting for its sculpted weld beads. This side now needs to catch up, where I just go ahead and sand down the putty. To sand that down, it's done all by hand with some sandpaper. And I basically just go over the various areas until I'm happy where the piece is thoroughly blended in. At that point there, I can address the side section over here that I touched upon before. With the camera readjusted, it takes us now to the side portion over here where we have the merge point where the plastic makes contact with the side portion. I already touched upon before how I put super glue in this section over here to fill in that gap, and now everything's been sanded flush. What I need to do though is I need to continue these etch lines into the plastic so it all looks like it blends in with one another. To do this, I'm going to take a needle file that I have right here, and I'm just going to go ahead and just go over this section of the plastic in random lines, much along the same way I did when I added these lines here to the metal all those videos ago. You go in at various angles and also at various depths, and when you're done, you will see how the piece blends in. That's basically all there is to it. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and sculpt on the weld beads, and that will complete the look. The last thing that I need to do to the rear area is add the remaining sculpted weld beads. But before I do that, I need to flip the turret over so I can add the sculpted weld beads to the bottom portion here, just for thoroughness sake. There is one more bit of equipment that's going to be mounted in this section over here, but I'll have more information on that in the next video. But back to the welds. So the welds were just added in the locations where the plates all interlock with each other, as they would on the real vehicle. And the other thing that I did was I also went ahead and took care of the bodywork found on the remaining fasteners, which were found on this area here of the lower plate. With that out of the way, I'm going to flip this thing over so I could go ahead and add the last of the sculpted welds on the remainder of the plates. With the rear plate area now fully completed, the next thing to turn my attention to are the torsion bar guards. The King Tiger has these two torsion bars that we all know that emerge from the sides of the escape hatch. Well, they are a bit frail and can be damaged pretty easily in combat. So the Germans developed these guards that we have right here. They basically consist of a simple bent thick piece of steel that are then welded to the rear section of the plate. These details are absent on the stock Armortek kit, so in the past, something like this I would have to have fabricated out of lengths of plastic and tubing, but in recent years I went ahead and tooled this component up as a 3D printed component. This piece here is listed on the eastcoastarmory.com product line and is offered in one of two options. This one here is the version that is pre-welded with the integrally printed on weld beads, and the other version is weldless in case the individual likes to sculpt their own welds. For this one here, the print on welds will do the job just fine. So from here, I'm going to go ahead, snip off the little runners that we have here on the sides, and I'll be able to then get these pieces thoroughly primed and painted. This is obviously important because once fitted to the model, you're not exactly going to be able to get in here with any layers of paint. So it's best to do that before the installation. With the turret flipped over right side up, I went ahead and prep the area for the installation of the hatch. This includes hitting all these areas here with the airbrush, because once the hatch gets fitted and those guards get fitted, you're not going to be able to get in here with the paint like I touched upon before. Same was also done to the inside portions here of the guards and also to the torsion bars themselves. So at this point here, the hatch can be fitted on permanently, and then the guards can be fitted in place, sealing everything off. While on that note, you can also see that the welds were added to these areas here, and it really does seal everything in. With the piece also primed, you can see how the part has metamorphosized to look like it was milled away, as opposed to the technique that I showed before with the addition of the two plates. And here's everything now fully installed. At this time, the rear escape hatch is permanently mounted to the hinges, and the guards have been positioned in place. The only thing I need to do is just add a little bit of sculpted weld bead right over here where there's that transition where the guard makes contact with the cut-up section of the puzzle plate over here, but that's something I could do off camera. But other than that, the rear plate here is now fully completed. While on the topic of weld beads, I also went ahead and completed the weld beads on the remainder of the roof of the vehicle. The weld beads are actually really important to add to the King Tiger, because on the top portion, besides it having the weld beads on the real vehicle, but on the Armortek kit here, with the way the plates are positioned and bent to shape, you are going to have some gaps found on some of these locations where the side makes contact with the top, and the best way to solve this is with the addition of the welds. However, like I touched upon before, this model here has a removable roof, and this does add a little bit of complications when you're going to go with a weld bead type setup. But I was still able to achieve the weld beads with also the top deck being removable. To take off the top deck, you open up the escape hatch, and basically you push in on the rear portion of the plate from the inside, to which then the whole piece will just pop right off. Like I stated before, the top deck is held on with magnets, and once the magnets give way, you can remove the top portion of the turret completely, and you'll notice the weld beads are still found in their appropriate location. What's nice about this is that once the top deck is remounted, the gap between the top deck and the turret over here is non-existent, which is a dead giveaway that the model is radio controlled and that the part is removable, because you will have a seam of some sort to deal with. But with the way this one turned out, that's just not the case, and the piece is completely seamless. Now, of course, it's not something that you really need to do very often or ever. This is just a holy crap, there's an emergency type situation, I need to take the top deck off, and that's why the model has this capability to begin with. Normally, however, you don't need to take the top deck off of the turret or even off the model by and large. So to put it back in, on the King Tiger here, you want to index it with the nose first. So I'll grab onto it from the front lift lug or lifting hook, line up that needle nose right there in its appropriate location. While grabbing the rear lift lug, I just align it and then let the thing just sit into place. Once it's a certain point and I can see that the weld beads are all where they need to be in contact with the upper, I just pop it in place and the piece is now good to go. As you can see, there are no seams whatsoever along the edges here of where the turret makes contact with the roof. One other thing I want to notice is with the Commander's Cupola, I didn't add any weld beads around this, and from what I was studying on some of the real surviving King Tigers, this doesn't seem to have been welded on. I'm presumed that the piece was removable, which does make sense. If it gets damaged, you know, you need to swap it out, and I guess that's easily done if you don't have to cut through any welds. But for this one here, I didn't add the welds at this time. I'm going to do a little bit more research on that. If I do see it with welds, then I'll go ahead and adjust accordingly. But outside of that, the turret is completed. There is one more thing I need to add, which is down here, and I touched upon that before, but outside of that, this thing is wrapped, and we can continue with the remainder of the build. I bet you thought we were done with this video. Well, that's not the case, so sit down because we just entered into the bonus round. The next thing to talk about, since the turret is pretty much wrapped up, are the sprockets, specifically their hubcaps. The hubcap sprockets are kit supplied and are these two units that we have here. They comprise of two CNC billet aluminum sections that are pre-drilled and then just slip into the recess found on the sprocket, giving you the missing face detailing. The pieces do have provisions for mounting on fasteners. Now the fasteners are either the acorn ones, depending on the kit that you have, or they just use standard hex bolts. I have used these in the past. In fact, my last King Tiger, I just took these and I detailed them out accordingly and mounted them to the model. But while working on this one, I figured, you know, there could be a better way, because these things, even though they work, they're a bit problematic. With the way the fasteners are with their locations, you'll notice that they're really close, if not right up against the wall here of the piece. And when you're trying to install fasteners in these locations, it's a bit difficult, because obviously you can't fit a nut in there unless you do some major cutting of a nut where you cut it in half, and it's a task in itself. Also, you are missing the fastener retention plates that are not supplied with the model but would be found on the real unit. In the past, I would fabricate these out of sheet metal, cut them to shape, bend them, and drill them, all that good stuff. And while I could have done that for this one here, I decided, you know what? Apologies, that's just part of the hazards of filming in an active shop. Anyway, so rather than trying to make these pieces out of metal and custom bend them and all that good stuff, I'm like, you know what? Let me go ahead and see if I could just make a 3D printed detail set that is used to enhance the stock Armortek variant. And you can see the CAD renderings of that set popping up on screen now. And basically, these are added to the ECA catalog and are just a drop-in installation on the stock Armortek components. So if you have a build and you want to keep these hubs and just want to give it some face detailing, there's an option to do so. Or if you have one that's already pre-built and you just want to upgrade the detail on it accordingly, that's a great solution for you. So that piece is made out of HD 3D printed components and, again, are intended for use with the Armortek piece. But I decided, you know what, let me go ahead and take this a step further and see if I could just make an entire replacement piece for this hubcap. And that is what I have right here. This component is another new addition to the EastCoastArmory.com product line, and you can see with this one here, it's all done for you. This includes the fasteners, the retention plates, as well as even the Zerk fitting. By the way, the Zerk fittings are included with the other set that I touched upon before, so fear not in case you're interested in that type of an option. But with this one here, I also wanted to make it a slightly different variant compared to the one on the Armortek kit. You see, the Armortek rendition has the hub where we have this cylindrical section protruding outward. And although this is legit and this is a real component found on the King Tigers, there was another option available, and that is the version that I rendered right here, where rather than a cylinder coming out, it's actually a tapered section emerging from the bottom base. So with this piece here, you get a chance to model the King Tiger in a slightly different format from the kit one. If you want to keep the kit one, rock on and just use the other set like I touched upon before. I'll probably also make this type of piece in this type of format also with the cylindrical one, but you know, that remains to be seen. For this build, I'm going to roll with this version that we have right here. The piece is printed in the standard material, which means it's very strong and very robust. If I snip these apart, you'll see that with one set you have enough for 2 sprockets, obviously enough for 1 King Tiger. With the pieces cut open, you get to see what they look like, and they're just basically a drop-in replacement for the stock Armortek units. They're a bit thicker on the inside, but you know, you can get away with this because I don't have to drill them out for the fasteners. And from here, the only thing these guys need are to be shot with a coat of primer, and then from there they can be mounted onto the King Tiger sprockets. With the piece primed, it's then time to go ahead and secure it to the model. In order to do this, this is done exactly as per the kit, where you use some kind of an adhesive in order to secure the piece in place. For this type of an application, I cannot recommend enough to utilize a temporary adhesive. For my builds, I like to go with silicone because, again, it keeps the piece in place without having to be a permanent bond. For whatever reason, if I need to yank it out, it'll pop off, but the piece will not pop off on its own due to the model operating. This is a technique that I utilize on just about all of my radio control builds if they have a sprocket of this type. On Armortek specifically, this is a technique I use on every single one of them. So once the silicone is applied, I then just take the piece and I insert it directly in place. The piece just drops right into where it needs to go with no modifications needs to be made to either the hub or to the sprocket in itself. This may be different depending on the model in question, because sometimes, you know, with different generations, perhaps the tolerances might be slightly tighter, but on this one, as you saw, it just slid directly into place with no other work being necessary. The one other thing I want to mention is the orientation of the holes, or I should say of the fasteners. You'll see that it's on the spoke here, lines up on the first fastener of every single one of these lineups. So if you're mounting these pieces in place, be sure to align it in this format so that it has the appropriate look that would be expected on a vehicle of this type. One other thing I want to mention is that with the washer, or I should say the retention plates, they overhang from the drum. And this is actually something that's great because this will prevent you from over inserting the component into place, and it just bottoms out in the appropriate location that we have here. So this one's now fully installed. I'm going to go ahead, just mount this to the opposite side, and the sprockets are now fully completed. With the turret work out of the way and with the sprockets now concluded, the last and final frontier on this build to get it into paint is to finish up the engine compartment as well as to complete the rear engine deck. However, this information is going to be left for the next video update. And with that, that wraps up this project update video for this 1/6 scale Armortek German King Tiger heavy tank. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel, where it's a great way to keep up to date on new posted content, being 1/6 scale project update videos like this one over here, or the other small scale model showcase videos that frequently get posted to this channel. Another way to keep in loop of new posted content is by liking us on Facebook. There, I have more photographs of this particular build that have been updated constantly since the start of the project, as well as you'll find photographs of many of the other larger and smaller scale builds that have been showcased on this channel in the past. Furthermore, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detailed components. Thanks again, and I'll be seeing you all again on the next one. Take care.